person will worship something, we have no doubt about that. That which dominates our imaginations, says Ralph Waldo Emerson, and our thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming. What do you worship? What gives your life meaning, purpose, and direction? Only you can answer that.
Oh, sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. Our Father and Mother and Sovereign of our mercies, inscribe us on pages of life.
By trumpet, harp, and lute, with cymbals and strings and flute,
With dancing, singing, and music we praise and sing hallelujah.
Our words of responsive invocation begin with a verse from the Psalms and go further yet, and you can find them literally written on the walls of this church. They welcomed this community for half a century, and we recite them to welcome ourselves and others. Will you join me? This is indeed a day which the Lord has made.
let us rejoice in it and be glad, and let us count our many blessings.
Let us be grateful for the capacity to see, feel, hear, and understand.
Let us be grateful for the incredible gift of life.
And let us be especially grateful for the ties of love which bind us together.
Giving dignity, meaning, worth, and joy to all our days.
Indeed. These walls and those words have been surrounding our welcomer since she was a youngster, am I right? Janet Peterson has not only been an adult here, but a child. Do you actually go back further than that? Did your parents belong to this church?
Yes, my dad often shared about going to the theater when the first church burned, and he had character school down at one of the theaters while they raised money after World War I to build this facility.
Which, by the
way
way,
back.
Yeah, by the way, the anniversary of the burning of that church comes up next year. It'll be 100 years next May.
He's not here anymore.
Yeah, yes, but you are, and let me get off the
Thank
stage
you.
so you have something to say.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Good morning. As Fred said, my name is Janet Peterson, and I was born into this great religion and this church building. Two of my grandchildren are with me today, while their parents are celebrating their 11th wedding anniversary, having been married here by Dr. Fred as one of the first marriages that he officiated as our new minister. I believe in and support Fountain Street Church. You are all welcome here. Both skeptics and believers belong at Fountain Street. Here, doubt and belief are free to work together to free the mind. Here, you are also free to grow your soul, to expand not just your knowledge, but your heart. I proudly serve as an usher. I am here today as a governing board member, serving on the 2017 Stewardship Pledge Drive. The best is yet to come. The pledge campaign is focusing on fellowship this week, so I'm taking this opportunity to officially launch a social idea that I've had in my head for several years. Gatherings for 6 or 7. These will be congregate-sponsored small social gatherings for the purpose only of having conversation with a diverse group of members, getting to know each other a little bit better. The hope would be that a host arranges an activity of their own choosing and then makes contact with 5 or 6 other congregants to join in the gathering. In turn, maybe a few members from that group will then each host a gathering with their own group of diverse members joining in their newly planned activity. I would like to share my experience of a gathering that I hosted just last week to see how this actually works. Since this idea is new to our church culture, I invited 6 members to my home. I'd really thought about trying to do that somebody had mentioned the grave tours, and then I was looking at the ghost tours, and I thought that would be a fun thing to do, but since this was first, I thought I better just have people at my home. So, I invited 6 members for just a couple hours, very early on a Monday evening. I invited an usher friend, a former youth leader of mine, a buddy member that doesn't get to Sunday services very often anymore, a member that I just contacted cold from the parents' circle, and she came. That was wonderful. And a couple that I sat by in a new discussion group I'm in, and I just went up and asked them if they'd come, and they did. So that was my diversity. I asked 2 of them to help by bringing a snack. I was very low-key and informal in my invitation, but then I followed through with confirmations and directions to my home. We had a great time, well, in my opinion, and there was strong enthusiasm to continue with this gathering idea. One member of the group has since told me of their plan to organize their own gathering, and somebody just came up to me in the social hall from the early service and is more than happy to get started with this. So I hope you all feel that buzz there. At Fountain Street, we believe that everyone desires a life that is meaningful, a life that makes a difference, a life that changes the world. After the service today, Jack Wohler and myself will be at each of the information tables to help with any questions or offer encouragement to those of you who might be interested in hosting a gathering. I'm hoping that together we can grow an even stronger climate of fellowship at Fountain Street Church. The best is yet to come, and you're all here. So I hope that we can have some extra fun together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You're all done.
All your money, all of your time.
I do want to point out something that may not be obvious to everyone in the room, but the author and the composer of that work are and were members of this congregation. Well, Adrian Swets, I'm afraid, he's passed on a few years, but he was a great friend of Jack Kimmell, who was the composer, and I'm pleased that you are here to be with us today. Jack, you are a prolific and blessed giver of good music, and thank you, Kathy Swets, for being here with him. They're bringing that gift to us over and over again. Some gifts really do keep on giving, and that can be a piece of music, a great piece of art, a poem, a passage, something sometimes incendiary. And we call upon those things, as I mentioned with Emerson, to shape those things which we worship. We want to focus ourselves on those things that really do deserve our attention. In the Christian tradition, the parable this week comes from Luke. It's probably one of the most troubling parables that Jesus utters, and it makes no sense. Let me make you understand. It makes no sense. The author of the gospel tries to make it make sense, but scholars say, no, the parable by itself is absolutely outrageous. We should remember Jesus was an outrageous brown-skinned prophet who was muckraking at every turn. Here he's raking the muck for fare. In a certain city, says Jesus, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. Let's start over. I want you to get a picture of this. There's a judge sitting down here. She's agape. My God! In a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In other words, a corrupt judge. In that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while, he refused. But later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet this widow keeps bothering me. I will grant her petition so she will not wear me out by continual harassment." That's the end of the parable. It's the parable of the unjust judge, and the judge is. In our own century, President Calvin Coolidge, considered in some ways the founder of modern conservatism, made this observation at one point: "The welfare of the weakest and the welfare of the most powerful are inseparably bound together. The general welfare cannot be provided for in any one act, but it is well to remember that the benefit of one is the benefit of all, and the neglect of one is the neglect of all." And in my commitment to recite things from memory in my year of living by heart, this poem by James Weldon Johnson, considered the dean of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. It's called "To America." "How would you have us, as we are, or sinking 'neath the load we bear, with eyes set forward toward a star, or staring empty at despair, rising or falling, men or things, with drooping feet or footsteps fleet, strong willing sinews in your wings, or tightening chains about your feet?" I conducted a wedding yesterday. It's getting hard to do weddings here because these are now people I knew as children. And while I rejoice in their maturity, I despair of my antiquity. But I'm finding it very difficult now to do them without crying. I only have 2 children of my own, but these are my boys and girls too. And I mentioned in the prayer yesterday at that wedding that there really are only 4 prayers, 3 invented by Anne Lamott, great writer. She says there are only 3 prayers: help, thanks, wow. I added one yesterday, oops. And I think that it would be good for us as we approach this moment in our worship service to do a little inventory. Let's pray together. Who here does not need help today with dragging steps or footsteps fleet? We all need a little help. It's sometimes hard to admit it because we want to be strong, but we forget there is a gift in weakness and a power even in fear. So our prayer for help is not that we not need it, but that we get it. And if not from some celestial spot, then from someone nearby who perhaps needs help too, but perhaps together we can go a little further than we could alone. We bring our prayer of oops, I'm sorry, for toes stepped on, for errors both conscious and unconscious. We have not been as good as we said we would be. We have failed to do what we said and failed to say what we could. Forgiveness is always there, but we really do have to be better than we have been. Our prayer of sorry and oops is to remind us that we should try a little harder, even at the simplest things. Our prayer of gratitude, of thanks, is that, yea, we are here. I'm taken to telling people that I'm upright and above ground. For this I am grateful. Everything else is optional. So we find gratitude in the smallest things, of being relieved of pains, of being saved from embarrassment, of being granted an hour or even a moment of complete joy. And our prayer of wow. What is that? It's appreciation. It's appreciation for the stuff that's there. The trees as they shed with beauty, the birds as they flock south, the sounds of the rain upon the roof, of laughter, the glimpses of life that we would not see. If we don't appreciate them, then what's the worth of it all? Help us to say wow a lot more. For all these things which we have in our hearts, we turn in silence that we may, with all gratitude, regret, appreciation, and petition, be truly present in prayer. And may we conclude our prayer ever with the names of those who once lived among us and now are gone, who died at this time in this year or in years past. We lift up the name and memory of Marion Peterson, Thelma Cobb, Roy Malarick, and Claire Jaretsky. Holy One, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights, bring rest beneath the wings of your presence to the souls of our beloveds, those who have gone to their place of eternal rest. May the one who is the source of mercy shelter them beneath your wings eternally, and bind their souls to you and to us, that they may rest in peace, that we may be in peace. And let us ever say, Amen.
You can still find your way. You will always find your way if you set your heart on compassion. Just turn and look inside, and the love you will find will be your guide. You can still find your way. You will always find your way if you set your heart on compassion.
Just turn and look inside, and the love you will find will be your
Be gentle with yourself and with everyone else. Strive to be kind in all you say and you do. Remember, everyone else is just like you. They only want to be happy too. Just like you.
You can still find your way. You will always find your way.
If you set your heart on compassion,
Just turn and look inside.
and the love you will find will be your guide.
As you can tell, I'm in a kind of a sentimental state this weekend. It's easier when you get older and a little less embarrassing, but I only mean a little. And I don't know about you, but well, it's also amplified by the reality that as we're sorting through the debris that accumulates in life, and I'm trying to be very good at my house, you go through lots of old things with associations, photographs, and pieces of paper that remind you of things you've forgotten, and yet this was your life. So I'm a little tender-hearted today, which doesn't mean my sermon is tender-hearted at all. It means I'm struggling, though, in some ways, and I say that because there is this notion abroad that clergy are strong, powerful, kind of invigorating, exciting people, and I don't feel that way at all today. And yet the task to inspire is always there. So I have to inspire, breathe in, and hope that what comes forth lifts me as well as you. If not lifting, at least gives you the courage to enter into the rest of the day. I don't usually talk like this, but we preachers, we stumble along just like the rest of you. We just do it in front of God and everybody. Taxes. Elections are always about taxes, aren't they? Always hear about them. And it doesn't sound like a very religious topic, but you may know that Ben Franklin famously said there are only two certain things about life. One is death and taxes. And death is certainly a religious topic, so why not taxes? In my series of sermons on issues that really matter but we're not hearing about, I've arranged my thoughts according to the clauses of the preamble of the Constitution, which explicitly names the purposes of our national government, to wit, to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and this week, promote the general welfare. That phrase, plus an early Supreme Court decision that goes by the name of McCulloch versus Maryland, empowers the government to do whatever is reasonable and constitutional to accomplish its goals, even if it disadvantages one or another state. And ever since that decision reached long ago, we have been wrestling with the questions of how much government and how much taxation is good and wise. I had a long paragraph on the history of that. I threw it away. Go look it up. Instead, I'm going to tell you a story about me. Actually, it starts with my father. My father loved trains. He worked for the railroad. And when I was quite young, he would take my brother and me with him on those weekend excursions that train lovers and train buffs would go to. You'd get on a train, often that had a steam locomotive, and it would go around a few bends, and people would take pictures. Now, find a child of my era who wasn't fascinated by a locomotive. I know I was. In my tender years, I had a little engineer's cap and a little engineer's jacket. I even had a birthday cake that was shaped like a diesel engine. But steam engines were the real excitement, with their pushing pistons and their spinning wheels, the smoke that came out of the stack and the steam from the cylinders. I learned that on top of the boiler of a steam engine was an object called a governor. It's a small pair of weighted arms that spun around from the pressure of the boiler, and when it was very hot, it would spin around a lot, and it would open a valve that would let some of the heat out to keep the boiler from exploding. And then as it cooled off, it would circle and circle slower, and the valve would close to keep the boiler from getting too cool. That was its purpose, to keep the boiler from being too hot or too cold. Notice the word governor. That's what governance is. It sets boundaries to too hot or too cold. Our Constitution is a form of governor. By its branches and its powers and its checks and balances, it keeps things from getting too hot or too cold. It's not perfect, as we've amended it, almost 30 times. But equally important are the many Supreme Court decisions that have clarified the powers of government and its ability to do its job. And one of those is that case I mentioned a moment ago called McCulloch versus Maryland. Now, I am not a lawyer. I'm not a jurisprudent. I'm really not a prude of any kind. But the point here is that it established the supremacy of the federal government over the states when the state of Maryland sought to tax the federal government to its own advantage. And Chief Justice John Marshall wisely observed that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. Why? If you tax 100% of anything, it's gone. And the state could not imperil the supremacy of the federal government through a tax. We all need to know about this decision because John Marshall and the Supreme Court perceived the connection between political power and taxation and money, and the danger that is present when we have too much or too little of either. Too much power and money in the hands of government can destroy anything it wants. It can also destroy the nation the way an overheated boiler can blow up. That's been at the heart of the conservative movement for most of a century. Since the New Deal, in fact, concerned that money and taxes in the hands of the federal government essentially rob the states and the people of their own authority and power. It's a concern well-founded, because after all, when people run for office, we elect those who will do something, especially for me or us or my group. And of course, that person then has to go and introduce a bill which will create a law which will demand money, and therefore it's ironic that we don't want the government to run our lives, and yet we want it to do everything for us at the same time. This is a real issue. What we tend to forget, though, is that the alternative, too little power and too little in the way of tax money, can bring the nation to an absolute halt. As a locomotive that can no longer move is nothing but a lot of fancy-looking wrought iron, a nation with too little government is not really a nation at all. We see its examples in the inept, incompetent, and dysfunctional governments where the wars in the Middle East are going on now, where the powers of even their armies are unable to confine the insurgencies all around them. That brings me to the second Supreme Court case you should learn about in church today. United States versus Butler in 1933. All you lawyers are thinking, I did not know my preacher was reading Gray and all the blacks. No, I'm not. I'm reading a lot of stuff to make a point, which I will get to. United States versus Butler had to do with a New Deal program. I believe it was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, in which during the New Deal and following the Great Depression, the federal government tried to prevent boom and bust cycles in farming by managing how much anyone could grow or not. It wished to govern the range of production so that we wouldn't have too much one year and too little another, and the prices would rise and fall and rise and fall. The Supreme Court, a conservative court at the time, ruled it was unconstitutional because it violated the rights of the states through the 10th Amendment to use the powers that belong to them. In other words, the federal government had trod upon the sovereignty of the states in managing the farmers. However, it did allow that the government was allowed to do the general welfare and use the monies through taxes to do just that. Now, we're a long way from religion, but bear with me as I said, there is a point. For whose good does the government exist? We, the people. They are the ones then who ordained, made the order, and established the Constitution that grants powers to the national government. It was we, the people. It was for the whole of the people, not this state or that state, but for the people as a whole. The general welfare, as argued by the framers and cited in Butler and in other places, consists of acts and laws that serve the good of everyone, not just a few. The framers wished to ensure that the national government would serve only the national good, not a local or limited good. This is all straightforward. We're not on any peculiar place, but this is the reason I'm making such an obvious case for an obvious point. Because we no longer live at a time when we believe the government is working for the general welfare, do we? If conservatism wisely questions overreaching for the general welfare, I believe it has overlooked the decline in our popular belief in the general welfare. We live in a culture in which it is dog eat dog, look out for number one. If I get mine and you don't, that's your problem. A new survey conducted or reported on by the Washington Post shows that we have been in a declining belief about democracy itself for almost 50 years. Less than half of the American population believes we are or should be or should want to be a more democratic or even are a democratic small d country. We have lost faith in democracy itself. Not only do more people not trust government, which we hear about all the time, we don't even trust each other anymore. There's a growing sense that I can't look upon my neighbor as my neighbor, but as an adversary, potentially a competitor, possibly even a criminal. Now, I don't know which is the chicken or which is the egg here, but Parker Palmer, whose book I've been using in my class after church, informing my thoughts on this series, has said that we need to recultivate what he called, and he's borrowing the term, habits of the heart. And he names 5 habits of the heart we need to recultivate. And the first one is, we are all in this together. And that's the point I want to make today. That phrase comes out of Alexis de Tocqueville, who in the 1830s observed American culture on a trip from his native France and talked about how the country was held together not by the Constitution or the government, but by what he called habits of the heart, the way people behaved with each other, going to meetings, founding libraries, starting organizations. They were involved not just in government, but in the fabric of the social life itself. The sociologist Robert Bellah wrote a book using that same title. He addressed a bunch of religious liberals, a lot like us, and he observed that what religious liberalism and American culture generally lack is a social understanding of human nature. Even when we say we're all in this together, we generally mean we're all in this together until I disagree. The moment we are asked to go along with something we don't like, to be responsible for something we're not going to enjoy, to be accountable to a good larger than our own selves, we often chafe and rebel in the name of our individual conscience, in the name of our sovereign right to be ourselves. How often have you heard me over the years describe us sometimes as the church of "you're not the boss of me"? Now that phrase we all heard from either our children or ourselves when we were children. And I think there is in liberal religion and in America a childish habit of the heart, and we'll call it that desire, that resentment of any limitation or judgment or expectation being put upon us by someone or something else. I believe this truly is the worm in the American apple. It eats away at our well-being by an atomistic desire for everyone to live exactly the way they want without any accountability to anyone else in the best of all possible worlds. There is something selfish and, yes, childish in an individualism run riot that insists on our right to be an individual over any social obligation or relationship. And it's there. You see it, you hear it on the left and the right. This is religious because the word religion itself means to bind together. Now, if liberal religion is about your individual right to think what you want, then perhaps the term liberal religion is an oxymoron, a logical impossibility. We're all in this together, meaning we're all together to be different from each other. For us and for the country, we need a vision that sees both the individual and the communal as sacred, both. That understands individual liberty to be one side of a coin that also includes social responsibility. We cannot have one without the other. We need them equally. And to serve one in preference to the other or without the other is spiritually and nationally idiotic. Well, how can we do better as a nation, since that's my subject? Let's go back to those taxes. And an old Republican, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who sat on the Supreme Court for a very long time, he famously said, "I like to pay taxes. With them I buy civilization." Taxes are the dues we pay, meaning due, as in obligatory, to the body of which we are a part, and apart from which we lose our ultimate identity. Can we levy them better? Can we make them fairer? Can we use them more fairly? Absolutely. But I reject the notion commonly heard that taxes are themselves a burden, a violation, a distortion of liberty. From this notion that taxes are absolutely essential to a democratic society, I reach the conclusion that tax laws which end up favoring a few at the expense of the many truly do violate the general welfare clause. And we know they exist, and we also know we can't afford to use them because we don't have the lawyers to pay to put them to use. That is what galls people in the country, is that the tax laws seem to work more for some than for others, that it is unfair and unjust. It may not be, but it sure looks that way. Add to that the legal avoidance of taxes by those who can afford to avoid them while the rest of us cannot. And we have lost all faith in the notion that taxes are a fair way of doing the nation's business. The perception of unfairness grows exponentially. Conversely, though, and this is where I'm different from some of my fellow left-wingers, I believe everyone who has a job should pay federal tax, even if it's only a widow's mite. One of the things I find appalling is when we hear people saying, well, all the rich people pay all the taxes and the poor people pay nothing. Well, let's remedy that. Everybody has to chip in. It may be a small amount, but that's one of the things we all do in a democratic society. We need a tax law and a system that, forgive me for quoting Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, known as Lenin, takes from each according to their ability and serves each according to their need. That's not a bad notion for government, because as Parker Palmer said, we are all in this together. I've mentioned national service in my previous sermon, the expectation that every person owes the nation not only its money, but its service, 1 or 2 years. It used to be there was only men, and then only men who couldn't afford to get a deferment. Everyone owes their nation a year or 2. It can be military, it could be civil, but let me be clear, no cherry-picking the fun jobs working as White House interns. Everybody puts their lot in with everybody else, and everyone should stand an equal chance of either being next to a millionaire or a millionaire being next to you. No, because as Parker Palmer said, we are all in this together. When I think of our current term limit laws, I think they generally do not work. But what if, and here I'm becoming speculative, more citizens could become more involved in government? Why do we have to go and ask people to join commissions and boards? You could be drafted after all. Why not? Why are we waiting for people volunteering to do the job? I don't know about you, but anyone who wants the job wants to get their job done, not mine. Do it by lottery. Why not? Shouldn't you not only get a jury notice, but here, you're on the school board this year. Show up. Why not? And speaking of an interesting thought, what would happen if, when a legislator retired for whatever reason, the next term would be drawn by lot from that district, and you would have to go and serve in the State House? Only one term. And really get to know it. And wouldn't that bottleneck some of that, well, in the best sense of the term? Everyone should serve, because in a democracy, we are all in this together. That's what I'm looking for, ways in which we can enhance the chances that we feel common cause rather than individuality along with it. We need a sense that we actually are kin and neighbor to one another, that the fact that you look different, are different in one way, that you have more, you have less, is immaterial to the common good. Again, I'm not making official proposals. I'm not a pundit. I don't belong to a think tank. I don't know any more than you do, but guess what? We outnumber them. I reject the black-white choices that the parties give us. Those can't be the only choices. They just can't. I reject those on the right who say that if black lives matter, blue lives do not. That's a lie. No one should believe it. I reject any notion that regulating guns means they're going to be taken away, or that welfare always means someone is indolent that should be working, or that climate change is a falsehood that's being put upon us to offend the fossil fuel industry. But I also reject the liberal orthodoxy that says every problem deserves a department, a program, and a budget. I reject the liberal orthodoxy that corporations are innately evil and populated with demons. I reject the notion that we can stop using fossil fuels in an hour and a half or even 1 year. Categorical positions used to win arguments freeze us into believing those are the only choices we have when there are many choices as there are citizens. And what we suffer from is a lack of imagination and a lack of creativity, the very things we boast about in our history as making us great in the past and could make us great in the future. We are all in this together, as a nation, as a spiritual community, as a species, and dare I say it with every other creature, as earthlings. This is not a kumbaya hand-holding statement of can't we all get along. It is the same sober realization that the same Ben Franklin supposedly remarked when they put their hand to the Declaration of Independence and he said, we must all hang together or most assuredly we will all hang separately. The nation requires each of us to be present with our vote, with our voice, with our taxes, with our arms and our legs. And if we want it to be a great nation, you cannot refuse to be a part of it. It is time for the USA to be the us of America. All of us. It's not easy. There are no quick answers. I don't know them. But we have no other choice. Really, do we actually have another choice? No. You're going to vote in a week or two. Vote for us. Not against them. Vote for the us of America. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer.